As the Illinois Psychedelic Society, we are going to ask you to help us in these efforts by contacting your elected officials. And then my specific role as the treasurer of the Illinois Psychedelic Society is I will probably ask you to make a donation at the end of this conversation or at some point tonight. So please, if you want to support this cause, if you want to support this organization, if you think that people should have access to this medicine, please help us with that. And if you can afford to, please make a donation to the Illinois Psychedelic Society. Let's go down the table. State Representative Ford, you have the microphone.
Thank you, and good morning.
No.
What is it? Afternoon? It's evening. All right. It's been a long day. Shawn Ford. I am state representative from the 8th District, which covers the Austin community on the west side, Oak Park, Berwyn, LaGrange Park, North Roadside, and some more western suburbs down all the way to Hopkins. I've been in the office now for 18 years, and I'm running for my 10th term. And I am here because there's a movement to end the prohibition of psychedelics. And I am in support of that, and I look forward to you helping make it possible.
Hello? Yes? Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Vilmarie Fraguada Narloch, she, her, ella. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm a Puerto Rican cat lady without any cats. And I'm a co-founder and director of Sana Healing Collective. You can find our table and Eric over there. You can buy some socks and support our community care fund. Aside from being a clinical psychologist, I also have a long history in drug policy reform and drug policy advocacy through Students for Sensible Drug Policy, who are also here. And I'm one of the co-authors of House Bill 1, which this fellow over here and this wonderful woman who just joined us are chief sponsors for. And we're excited to talk more about it tonight.
Hey there, everybody. My name's Asis Lira, he, him, his pronouns. I am the Policy Advocacy Chair with the Illinois Harm Reduction and Recovery Coalition. Professionally, I'm a Policy Advocacy Manager with AIDS Foundation Chicago. So all things related to public health, HIV services, equity, access, et cetera, et cetera. We work on things around the social determinants of health, so we get really winded down into different coalitions. But the reason why we're here today is because we're in the similar ecosystem when it comes to addressing the war on drugs and its implications to public health. The Illinois Harm Reduction and Recovery Coalition has largely tried to work on the decriminalization of substances, but taking steps to get there. One of that is obviously looking at forms of supervised consumption, psychedelic treatment being one of them, listening to the stories, lifting them up, seeing the impacts of storytelling, and making sure that we can make moves forward to have policy happen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dina Rollman. I spent about the last 10 years basically deep into cannabis world, legalized cannabis world, working on law, policy, and implementation of legalized cannabis programs in about 15 states. So it's given me just an interesting perspective about like the state-by-state experimentation that we are doing when it comes to prohibition. So I'm passionate about taking, what I've learned from that and trying to help Illinois get to the best policies and framework for legalizing psilocybin that we can.
Hi, that was loud. I'm State Senator Rachel Ventura. I want to thank you all for being here. I'm somewhat new of a senator. I'm finishing my second year. This was one of my top priorities coming in. I did file 45 bills in my first 2 years, and I passed about 24 of them, so that's pretty good. I really care deeply about mental health, and I really think that this is an answer for people who are really stuck and keep spinning those wheels. So we're hoping to get this passed. If not this year, we're going to keep on chugging for January and refile it. But I'm sure you have lots of questions, so I'll leave it at that.
All right. Thank you all so much for being on this panel. I'm excited to be here with this. Let's start off with the elected officials, State Senator Ventura and State Representative Ford. Each of you have your own specific bill on this subject. Where do they stand? Can you give us a brief overview of what they would actually do? And then from there, maybe a follow-up question of, what resistance are you getting? What hurdles are these bills facing? And what objections are you hearing from your colleagues? So I'll let whichever one of you want to go first and go through that.
Okay, well, I think the bills are starting to merge together. They were initially filed separately, but we've been working kind of hand in hand with the advocates and across the aisle to try and get bipartisan legislation. So as the draft of the bill stands today, it essentially creates 4 licensing. One is just for testing, one is for growing, one is for healing centers or the facilities, and then one is the facilitator, the individuals who would help supervise the use of the medicine. We've built in things like this needs to be naturally producing psilocybin. We've built in stuff for integration afterwards. Initially, we started with 1 day of integration. We've upped it to actually 3, and that was part of getting bipartisan support. The second or the last 2 could be waived if a therapist is willing to take on the integration. So we really want to be mindful in not just having it legalized, but really the process in which people utilize this medicine, because we recognize that the medicine is only half of the toolbox. The other half is doing the work, creating new pathways and new habits and behaviors. So we've kind of built that into the structure. There's a lot of other aspects of it. There's some decrim, removing it from Schedule 1, processes of how the state will handle this and which agencies will be doing the licensing and testing, fingerprinting. So it's about a 300-page bill. And it's ever growing. We also worked with the Oregon Health Authority, who was very helpful this last summer in kind of pointing out some of the pitfalls that they had and some of the successes they had, helping us understand the budget that is needed, the staffing needs to staff up to really implement this program, but then also some of the health aspects and protection, like privacy protection. Since this doesn't fall under HIPAA, what does that look like, especially in some of these states where they had individuals to start businesses without licenses, and then the people buying the product didn't know that, and so then all of them basically were criminals all of a sudden, and the DEA was going to come after them. So we want to make sure there's appropriate protections for individuals who are using this. So Oregon's been very helpful in helping us continue to draft it. But with that, I'll stop there and let Representative Ford kind of take over.
Thank you. It's so good to have her as a partner. Senator Ventura, she's in the Senate, and so if you ever hear that members in the Senate and the House don't get along, we get along, and we are working on behalf of this issue. So when people say to you that this is a new issue, it's not. This bill, we've been working on it long before it was even filed into the record. So it was filed into record like 2022, but they worked on it for years. So it's very important to let people know that this isn't new, because some people would say we need more time. Well, this is something that experts have been working on for a long time, long before the senator and I even thought about filing a bill. So it's not going to be for recreation use. It's only going to be for therapy. And so that's important to note, that people will not be able to go to a dispensary to purchase it for recreational use. And it's going to create jobs, it's going to create revenue, it's going to also end the prohibition. And I think that we know that prohibition has never been successful when we tried to implement it. So you've heard what the bill does. I hope that we could continue to work together in order to educate the public and educate the press and the media to end the myths and end the stigma of this therapy.
Well, thank you both so much. Next question will go to you, Vilmarie. We're talking about mental health here. We're talking about using this as a treatment. Walk us through what that looks like as a clinician and what your vision of how this treatment would be implemented moving forward if this bill becomes a law, or
Sure.
when this bill becomes a law.
There it is. Yeah, and I mean, we have fortunately a lot of good examples of psilocybin-assisted therapy already because of clinical research that's been happening for many, many years now. And so what we're seeing in the clinical research and what this bill is reflecting is sort of a protocol, a procedure of sorts. So it's a combination treatment where you have a really involved therapy component in, you know, a really well done, thorough mental health assessment, medical assessments, to make sure that there's no contraindications with other medications or other health conditions that somebody might have. And then you get into the sort of preparation phase of things. So that is several sessions with a therapist to help people understand, you know, what this treatment is, what they're getting themselves into, and also start to unpack some of the things that they're wanting to focus on and really understand what it is that might be coming up in these experiences. And then you get into sort of the medicine phase of things where, you know, you're actually having these sessions with the therapist in the space with you. It's really well supported. There's lots of different models of what that looks like. What we do at Sana Healing Collective is it's very sort of comfortable space. You've got eye shades on if you're comfortable with that. You've got headphones. There's music that's tailored to the experience. All of that is something that's decided between the therapists. It's a collaboration to determine the setting. And then where the real work happens is in the integration process. So after the ketamine, or excuse me, the psilocybin work in this example, but we work with ketamine at Sana, it's really sort of like, what are the insights? What came out of that experience? What are you learning about yourself? How can you weave that into your life? What changes you want to make? You know, kind of looking into your patterns and things and making those adjustments for that sort of sustained long-term gain.
Excellent, thank you so much. The next question will be for ACEs. How do we tie in psychedelic-assisted therapies into harm reduction, and what type of education do we need for the community once we allow psychedelic therapies in Illinois?
That's a pretty heavy question. I think to start it off, this helps expand the conversation around substance use. A lot of the work that we've been doing has been trying to find an end to the overdose crisis that's happening across the state. And I think this helps provide a different angle or a different entry into the conversation, right? When we're looking at, you have a professional that's looking over you, you have this like long sort of supportive process where someone is there to help guide you with that. I think in a similar fashion on the ground with day-to-day use, folks that lightly use substances, right? We provide that support to one another. There's like, whether it's never using alone, whether it's having food, staying hydrated. There's like little nips and tricks that people kind of implement in their day-to-day substance use that I think this conversation helps to kind of normalize our relationship with substances. Because I think a lot of it has been stigmatized, villainized because of the way that substances have been criminalized. So I think that's the way that harm reduction kind of ties into this, and reminding us that, you know, outside of this, all arrays of sort of substance use can integrate harm reduction in their practice. So.
All right, Vilmarie, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think because of the war on drugs, our drug education is terrible. I think we all can agree to that. And so that's a really big factor of this bill, is that harm reduction component that ACES is talking about, of just helping people understand drug use in general, but how to do so safely, what you need to know about psilocybin in particular. There's lots of different types of psilocybin compounds, like what mushroom does what. It's a lot, right? And this gives us that opportunity to kind of come out of the shadows and be really open and provide lots of education to folks about psilocybin and other drugs.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Dina, this next question will be for you. What legal challenges might arise from legalizing psilocybin for therapeutic purposes? Federal legal hurdles, state legal hurdles. If it's legal under the state, could we still expect some type of legal issues on the state level?
Yeah, I mean, to set expectations, I would say federal legalization is 5-10 more years away. I mean, I got into cannabis 10 years ago, and at the time I said, oh, in 3 to 5 years it'll be federally legal. And it's 10 years later, and like maybe we're gonna get rescheduling. I mean, we should, but we're gonna get rescheduling, but that's still not legalization. So government works well, but sometimes very slowly, especially on the federal level. On the state level, Illinois is great in the sense that we pass bills legislatively, we don't do ballot initiatives. So a ballot initiative can ride on kind of popularity of the cause, and you get voters out and they vote for it, but they don't necessarily always exactly know what they're voting for, the details aren't worked out. Illinois, it's a little more difficult on the front end to have these bipartisan bills and all of that. So it's tricky, but what I liked about the way it worked for cannabis was a lot of details did get hammered out on the front end. So then when it came time to implement, you kind of had the framework worked out, and everybody had a chance to weigh in, object, give suggestions for how to make it a good bill. But even still, and I love hearing all this emphasis on education, once we got out there and had to actually like open a dispensary in any particular town, the stigma was real, massive stigma. You would go to like a city council meeting and try to get zoning approval to open, and there would be organized opposition, hundreds of people bust in, staying till 1 a.m. to have their say about why marijuana should not come to their town. And honestly, to me at this point in 2024, a surprising belief by a whole lot of people that as long as you don't legalize drugs, well then their teenagers won't find them and nobody will find them, and they're just impossible to find then. And so that's all we have to do to stop teen use. And I'm like a suburban soccer mom, and I often had to be like, I hate to break it to you. Your kids are finding these things. And guess what? One of our things was like, drug dealers don't card, dispensaries do. So like if, drug dealers are not testing their product to make sure there's no adulterants or other things in them, like legalized dispensaries do. And there was a lot to do to get them to get over some fear that legalizing would increase, teen use or other uses. So the good news is we've kind of learned what does and doesn't work to some extent in those conversations, what kind of education is needed. The bad news is the stigma's real, and it's going to take time.
Oh, thank you so much. Just a moment of housekeeping. How is the sound in the back? Can you hear us good? We're getting a lot of HVAC noise up here, so maybe speak into the microphones louder, panelists. If you can't hear us in the back, give us a thumbs down, or we'll start shouting at you, because from where we are sitting, the noise up here is pretty significant, I think. So we're going to work on that as an organization. Senator Ventura, you are beckoning me to give you another opportunity to explain the bill. What does it do? What is holding it up? Let's get into the real meat and potatoes of the legislation and the legislative process. Where is the opposition coming from? What compromises do you think might need to be taken in order to get this legislation passed into law?
You can tell we're politicians because we only answered half of that question the first time around. So one other thing that is added to the bill is the advisory board. And what's important is the advisory board isn't just for the onset of the bill, but it's an ongoing advisory panel that will look at best practices, that will also they've been tasked to look at Medicaid to pay for this, as well as other insurances in the future. So we do know that access is really important. So what's holding the bill up and where they're at? So the Senate version of the bill has been heard in the executive committee. We did a Senate hearing. I've been aggressively trying to push that for the upcoming veto session. We do have, including myself, 19 sponsors, co-sponsors, which is great because you need 30 people to get it out. And I did pick up one additional co-sponsor who will add his name in veto session, which puts us at 20. So it's pretty good. So the bad news is what's holding it up. Our IDFPR, which is the Illinois Department of Financial Professional Regulations, I always mess that up. Their fear is about implementation, that they're not going to have the staff or the budget dollars for it. There has been some cannabis changes in the state, as well as some of the Delta-8 hemp products that need to be regulated, and all of that is falling on IDFPR, on top of the fact that they just got new software after like 20 years of doing everything in paper and paper boxes. So there has been a lot going on in that department, but that's not a good enough excuse for us to hold that legislation up, so we're continuing to push towards them. What that might look like is, instead of opening up for an unlimited number of licenses, it's possible that we start off with, a set number of licenses and then grow. We did learn from cannabis that that was problematic for a lot of different reasons, but as the representative pointed out, this is not going to have retail sales. It's not going to put the onus on the individual to be diagnosed with something before they could get a cannabis card, for example. So there are a lot of changes, and there are some benefits to starting off small and then growing it. So that could be some of the negotiations. The good news is I have spoke with the governor's office on, is it the decrim that's holding it up? And that does not seem to be the issue. So that's the really positive side of that. But it's his budget too that he presents to us that we then have to fight that. Well, at the end of the day, it's a General Assembly budget, but we fight the back and forth on his introduced budget. I would like this to be a part of the introduced budget. At this moment, it's not. So we're continuing to try to push the governor to include that in his introduced budget for the 2026 budget. But Oregon also told us that it only costs them $7 million over the first 2 years to scale up the resources they need. So all things considered, in a $53.1 billion budget, $7 million is not that much money. So we are very hopeful that we're going to keep pushing IDFPR and pushing the governor's office to move this. And then I would say the last thing is the House. So I'll let the representative talk about this, but we do need 60 votes in the House and 1 vote from the governor, his signature, 30-61. I think we're well on our way to getting the 30. So do you want to give them an update on what's happening at the House?
Yeah, right. Well, I would say some of the, some of the pushback, I would say, one, you have to donate to the organization. And organizations that actually advocate and come to Springfield to educate members, educate staff about this therapy. When cannabis was passed, it was passed because they spent millions of dollars lobbying. It's unfortunate, but we have to send people down to Springfield to educate members of the General Assembly so that they could vote for it. I think that's our biggest obstacle right now. Not so much that the governor doesn't want it, the members of the General Assembly doesn't want it. I think it's more that it is not a big issue. And so if we can join together and make sure that we make it a big issue, we could pass it. We've seen things like cannabis pass when we never thought it would be legal in Illinois, but it became legal because it was an issue that people wanted. That's the number one reason why we haven't passed this bill. And I'll leave it at that. So donate to the organizations that will lobby to educate, to end the stigma, and to educate people about how important it is so that we can make it bipartisan so Republicans understand that this is a therapy. This is not a drug that people are going to use for recreational use, but it's going to be a drug that veterans and people with PTSD plan to use for therapy. Because the traditional medicine hasn't worked. And I'll give you one example. The Blackhawks player Daniel Costello, the superstar, he won the Stanley Cup, and he is a supporter of all of us here, and he has testified that he tried all of the traditional ways, but when he tried psychedelics, it healed him. And that's what we have to do. We have to spend money to help members of the General Assembly hear these testimonies of how this is a therapy that heals people and it should not be denied. So we could talk a lot about other obstacles, but the obstacles go away when we educate people, and to educate people, it costs money to have lobbyists do the job.
You want to talk about the hearing in December?
December 8th.
Excellent, thank you. Vilmarie, this one will be...
Hold on, this is going to be heard at a House hearing on December 10th, we think, is that the date?
Yeah.
And so you have a chance to talk to House members before that December date and really educate them on this issue. But he's right, the more of us who are having these conversations, the more educated the representatives become and become more comfortable to vote for it.
Oh, no worries, let's have this conversation. Vilmarie, this one's going to be kind of started with you, but then let's just go all the way down the line with this question for everybody. What role do you see Illinois playing in terms of leading the way in legalizing psilocybin therapy? And I'd like to have every panelist answer this, so kind of just real quick, like how does Illinois doing this lead the way, or what other states are ahead of us, and how can we help blaze this trail?
Sure. I mean, it's definitely like putting out our little flag in the Midwest, right? Doing so legislatively. We don't have the ballot initiative here in Illinois, so that's a different factor. It really takes a lot of people power. I will say, I volunteered my time to write this bill. Much of what has happened with this bill has been very grassroots, very not funded, very volunteer. And as the representative said, we do need support from all of you. I think the decriminalization piece is really significant. As far as what we've seen in other states, that's not something that they've got in mind, but it's really important to us here, those of us that are working on this and that are, want to end the war on drugs, in general. That's a really big component. I'm really glad to hear that so far that's not been any, there hasn't been a lot of pushback from that. If you'd have asked me 3 years ago, I would have said that's probably going to be the first thing to go. We were going to fight for it, but that was going to be the first thing to go. So the fact that we're still sitting here and that's still part of this bill is huge.
I think I would add that this would provide a sort of litmus test on the cultural change that needs to take place alongside the education for legislators. When we're looking at long-term campaigns, whether it's supervised consumption or the decriminalization of substances, I think this could help provide the opportunity for the public to have conversation, right? You're seeing in a therapeutic environment the benefits of psychedelics. People are able to engage in a way that's we're seeing this across lines, right? This shouldn't have to be a partisan issue. I really appreciate Senator Ventura kind of pointing out that this could be a bipartisan initiative. Sorry about the feedback. Am I back in? Yeah. Dang, I lost my train of thought. But I think largely, I feel like that would be a way that Illinois could help lead sort of progress in this direction and overall in the ecosystem of harm reduction as well.
So like I said, I sort of had an interesting vantage point of watching Illinois legalize medical effective, January 1, 2014. It's 10 years later. We were the 14th state, I think, to legalize, and it was medical only then. And now we're up to, 36 states, right? And what we've seen with cannabis was each state would look to the states that had already gone before them with a critical eye. What do we want to take that they did well? What do we want to change that they did not do well? And that's a good way to go. It's you're basing it on real world data, real world experiences. What do they regret? So talking to Oregon, very helpful. this coming year, 2025, Colorado is going to roll out its psilocybin program. So I think it remains to be seen, what we know that they did a lot similar to Oregon and a lot different, right? So if we're next, if we're third, if we're fourth, if we're fifth, whatever it is, you start adjusting as you go. So I think it's, going to be interesting, and, I think all eyes on Colorado, early this coming year. It's going to be real interesting.
Okay, so I'm really passionate about this bill, and I feel I could talk about this question for a long time, so I'm going to try to be brief. The first is that if Illinois passes this, we would be the first state to do it under legislative. So while California and Arizona have made those attempts, their governors have vetoed the bills. So that would be huge, first of all. Second of all, states like Utah and even parts of Arizona have really limited it, especially Utah's where it says it has to be FDA approved. So then that becomes the race with the pharmaceutical companies. Now, here in Illinois, we've had conversations with some of the early adopters for Lycos. I've had one-on-one conversations with Compass. We know that they are chomping at the bit right now. We've kind of worked away with them where they're going to file legislation this year that basically just mandates that the state, if the FDA changes anything, that the state has to uphold that change in any drug regulations within 30 days. That is true of all drugs as opposed to just psychedelics. So that way it doesn't muddy the water. If something does pass the FDA, it doesn't hamper our chances of passing what we're trying to do, which provides more of a natural pathway and access for individuals to help other individuals. So while it is a race to beat pharma there, it isn't in Illinois. And I think that's really important because there are people who are going to want to go to their doctor and get a pill and be very clinical about it. And then there's people who want to go see a shaman, you know what I mean? And there's like a whole plethora of everyone in between. And I think there's a real conversation about why this is important for everybody to feel comfortable and feel safe when doing this medicine. And so if that looks like a doctor's office versus a jungle, we need to have those abilities to do that. So I think that that's really important what Illinois is doing, allowing better access and making sure that people can utilize its benefits, not just because they have great insurance or can pay $4,000. So the other thing I would say is getting this right. So working off of what Colorado has done, off of what Oregon has done, and continue to tweak things, we won't be the last state that looks at this. There's several states that have been looking at legislation now, but I feel like the early adopters set the stage for it. And so I think that Illinois is really primed to set a good stage for it. And that comes down to not allowing it to be strictly mental health driven or psychiatrist driven. We have gotten some pushback from the national psychiatry where they really want to only be FDA, and we built that into the bill. So there's 3 pathways. You can either have just a high school diploma and some type of certificate, like a drug and alcohol counseling certificate, where your mindset is really in harm reduction, and you can become a facilitator by going through the program. You can have a bachelor's degree and go through the program, or you can show that you are competent with your culture and be able to go through the program regardless of your education. That means if you are Indigenous or Native American and this has been a part of your culture, or you have some other usage that you've been utilizing this medicine in another state or country, that you have the ability to have to get a facilitator license and basically help those heal. And so what better way than those who have been through this to do this? And I think that's really important and something unique that we've built into Illinois' legislation. So yeah, I mean, I could go on and on, but I'll stop there.
Yes. So I think Illinois, as the senator said, we will get it right. I think we lead by getting it right. How do we get it right? We make it safe, and we make sure that there's access for everyone that need it, and access for people to be in the business across the board. I mean, when we look at cannabis, we didn't get it right, but we continue to get it right and make it better. But we need to make sure that we have not only the providers, but the growers and people that are able to be in the business is diverse. So from the business standpoint to access to the therapy, if we do that right, then we're leading in the right direction.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for those answers. I got a lot of questions here. It's a big fork in the road with this conversation. All of these panelists are supporters of this legislation. Looking at the audience, I imagine there's a lot of supporters in the audience as well. But this is kind of a grab bag question to any of the panelists. But what is something that you want to avoid in legalizing psychedelic therapies? And as kind of a follow-up to that, should plant-based medicines be treated or regulated differently than synthetic compounds? So whoever wants to take the first stab at that, go for it. Anyone? Let Dina go.
So one of the things that was pretty difficult about how tightly regulated Illinois was with medical cannabis was, in some ways, it kind of made a liar out of a lot of people. Like, you had to find a doctor who would say you had a certain condition. You had to, kind of dramatize what was going on with you in order to fit into that category. And I think any law that kind of makes a liar out of the doctors and the, consumer / patients is not something any of us really feel real good about, right? So what I want to avoid here, and I really like what I'm hearing tonight, is it's great if you have PTSD and this is truly a very pure medical use for you. Absolutely, you should have access. But it's okay if there's other reasons you want to use psilocybin for something that wouldn't qualify as strictly medical, but is really valuable to you anyways. And let's just be honest about that, and not require doctors to sign forms they don't really believe and ask people to claim to have conditions they don't have. That's what I'd like to see.
Let me just back you up on that. It's very important. I think it's important that we support one another when people say something that's valuable. You don't have to have it for use just because you feel you have a medical problem. I mean, I had some ginger ale, and it wasn't, right? So I wanted that not because I have a medical problem, the beer, but because I wanted it. So you're right.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think this is, kind of what it comes down to is the advisory board and making sure that we have people on that actually know about this work. I've seen horror stories about what's happening in other states where they have folks that have no idea what a psychedelic is on their advisory boards, and that's why? So I wouldn't want somebody who doesn't know what the hell they're doing telling me as a therapist how to do my job, because I'm the one that went through the training, I'm the one that has this experience, the client is the expert in their life, so we need to be able to do this work, we need to be able to have the flexibility to individualize the treatment to the needs of our clients, and so I want to make sure that we don't over-regulate things like Dina was saying.
Yeah, and I'll just circle back to what I see as 3 types, and there's more than types than that, but I'm going to pigeonhole into 3 types. You've got the naturally grown, you've got some type of hybrid grown, synthesized type product, and then you have an FDA approved product. So we want to focus this bill on just the naturally grown. We've seen a lot of political headache with Delta 8 and what synthesizing plant medicine can look like. Now I understand the real reasons that for equity why we want to go that route, but we also know that from a marketing standpoint, an overdose standpoint, and so many other things, that synthesizing hybrid is not something we can guarantee as safe, and setting is so important, and that safety of what you're getting when you go in is really important in getting this right. And then when it comes to the FDA aspect of it, when they're getting their approval, it's for something very specific, right? It's for PTSD or depression or a certain type of depression. And so what we find with that is you see sometimes you get this diagnosis drift, and where people are saying you have this just so you could get this medicine, and that kind of goes back to what you guys had talked about. You shouldn't have to justify why you want to better your health in this. And so I feel like I'll leave that to the pharmaceutical companies, but we want to focus on the ability to naturally grow this so that people can feel safe, that the medicine as we know it today is what people will be utilizing here in Illinois.
I will say that there is one tiny little bit of language in this legislation that the advisory committee, board, whatever, will also have the opportunity to review other substances and the research surrounding them and determine whether they want to add this other substance to this medical system that would be created.
Awesome. And just to kind of like clarify some more stuff in the legislation specifically for the audience who may or may not know the real nitty-gritty details of these bills. Representative Ford, I was doing some math on your bill. Your advisory committee is 16 people. Senator Ventura, your advisory board, I believe, is 27 members. Those are pretty robust advisory boards, which I think definitely has the potential for good. And then also one more clarification. So we're talking about natural substances. It looked like there was a carve out for mescaline to be allowed for therapeutic purposes, but not peyote, specifically out of respect for indigenous cultures in the United States. So just little factoids for the audience for that. ACEs, this will be a question specifically for you. What are some of the stigmas that you hear about with psychedelic therapies, and what's something that you would like to dispel? Or Vilmarie or Dina, any of you three could answer that, but what are some of the stereotypes that people might have around this that we would like to eradicate or correct in terms of the general perception?
I would be pretty transparent in saying that I haven't had the opportunity to speak to too many members about psychedelic therapy specifically. But I think largely what does make a difference, and Rep. Ford was kind of making a hint at this earlier, is that highlighting the stories and testimonies of folks that have already benefited from therapies like this makes such a huge impact. The work that we do in the Illinois Harm Reduction and Recovery Coalition, like we talk about substances broadly, like day-to-day use, chaotic use, polysubstance use, etc. And I think it becomes difficult because folks already have their preconceived notions of who is considered or coded as a substance user. But when you have a broad array of age groups, backgrounds, identities, whether they be professionals, your teenager in the suburbs, or folks firsthand kind of giving their own accounts, it makes such a huge difference. And I think even post this legislation passing, right, because it's going to happen, you got to put it out there. It's important that even post passage, that these stories continue to kind of go to like the ears of members in the assembly to let them know that there was a positive impact, because there could potentially be like a sort of cultural conversation, whether it be in media, online, threads. I'm sure you all have seen many conversations take place online, and I think that's like an important element in all this as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of stigma about all drugs, frankly. But certainly with psychedelics, I mean, we've got, LSD will make you jump out of a window. MDMA will cause holes in your brain. All of this stuff that was put out there by who knows where, and the DARE program, and all of that good stuff. That is a factor, and that is something that, as we're speaking to representatives, we're kind of up against some of that really basic, kind of real old school misinformation, that it'll make you crazy, et cetera, et cetera. And so being able to talk about, this in a way of helping them understand that we're using this for healing, we're using this for growth, while also being careful not to, in the same breath, be stigmatizing other drugs, I think is a really sort of careful dance we have to be doing and be really mindful of. There is a risk of psychedelic exceptionalism, right? That psychedelics are the holy grail of all medicines and everything else is trash. We saw this with cannabis. So I want to make sure that we're being really thoughtful about how we are communicating this to, your friends, your family, the representatives you're all going to go talk to about this bill.
Dina, you want to add to that? That's good? Okay. So I got a couple more questions, some biggies, and then let's open this up for discussion with the audience. So think of your questions, audience members. I'm not sure logistically how we'll do the questions. We may have you line up over here and use the glitter mic. I think that's probably better than just raising your hand and shouting, but I still have some questions for the panel here. We hear a lot about equity in the cannabis industry and access to cannabis as a medicine. I'd like each of you to kind of discuss a little bit what equity in psychedelic therapy looks like in your vision of how this legislation would be impacted and enacted and when it becomes law.
So again, when we talk about the state-by-state experimentation going on, Oregon was the first to launch its psilocybin program. There's these service centers. I think the majority of the people going to them are coming in from out of state. I think the typical price, at least when it launched, for just a one-day psychedelic experience was $1,000 to $2,000. So if you think about that, plus your airfare, plus your hotel, this is like several $1,000s to have like a 1 day plus then integration experience. I don't think that fits anybody's definition of equity, right? That's not kind of any sort of equal access that really limits who can benefit from this. So I think Oregon is struggling with that, and every state is going to have to think about how, you do want qualified, therapists and facilitators. Like, there's going to be a cost to their time if they've received the qualifications and training that they should to work with you. So you can't have this be free necessarily unless it's subsidized by somebody else or health insurance or whatever. But trying to strike the right balance of being able to keep these centers in business and pay the therapists who are doing this good work, but not make it so expensive that it's really not accessible for everybody. It's going to be tough, but I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think that's a real issue. We started Sana Healing Collective with that idea in mind. We knew that what we're seeing is going to be really, really expensive. So, support your local psychedelic nonprofit, first and foremost. But with this legislation, there's a lot of layers to it, right? There's lots of different license types. There's lots of all these different, advisory board members. And all of those are an opportunity for access and equity. So having people from the community serve on this advisory board, for example, having equal access to licenses, making them not so expensive, right? Having all these different opportunities to make things more accessible training, making sure that BIPOC folks and Indigenous folks have access to good training opportunities, scholarship programs, things like this are really important. It's not only about the participants, the clients, but it's about everybody that's involved in the process being able to get access to it.
So I would say my vision looks like universal health care that takes a holistic view at what we eat, how we move, and the medicines that we use to heal ourselves. But we're far away from that, and Illinois does not have the only say in whether or not the United States has universal health care. So in the meantime, I think that we are being very mindful about some of the individuals who have been left out of our medical system, out of a for-profit healthcare system, and what does it look like to really aggressively try to lessen that gap in their access. But I will also put a plug in there. Call your congressmen, call your U.S. senators, demand universal health care, because we should be able to focus on the health of our body and the quality of the health care we get, not because of the insurance or the amount of money we have in our pocket, but because it's a human right.
So I'll just support her on that. Access is important. Medicaid, Medicare should pay for it. And if that happens, then everyone that need the therapy will have access to it, and making sure that the state does its job helping support businesses scale up so that communities that may not have facilities are able to set the facilities up in their areas and grow them.
And to just kind of follow up on that, do you think the media portrays this issue in a serious way? I know when we were working on medical cannabis, it was always kind of a joke in the media. It was a B-roll of a dirty fingernail hitting a joint at a festival. You know, it wasn't grandma eating a gummy. It was always kind of trying to play into these people's ideas of what their worst case or the abuse of what medical cannabis would look like. So both the senator and the state rep, I mean, you both have done media coverage and interviews on this. What is your experience working with the media on this issue specifically?
So I feel there's a lot of unknown, and that's kind of how the media is portraying that. Now that's good in that they're not putting the stigma out there. And it's always a picture of, you know, a dried up mushroom. You know, it's never like someone being happy. But at the same time, it's the same they were running into with our colleagues. You know, I'll go up to them and say, hey, what do you think of the Cure Act? What's that? The bill that legalizes psilocybin. What's that? Magic mushrooms. Oh, yeah, I don't know. Those are the conversations we're having, whether it's with press or our colleagues. And so the fact that there's kind of this blank slate gives us a great opportunity. But I also think that when you start framing it the way that we have, where it's talking about healing that people need, that unstuckness, and not just pigeonholing into mental health, but really this adult supervised experience that people can really further themselves, whether that's a spiritual aspect or mental health aspect. And I think people are ready for that. Like the post-COVID world, the mental health crisis. I mean, we've got a task force on suicide that's starting in our state. So people are ready for this. And I think that there's an openness to it, but almost like they're afraid to say, yeah, tell me more. But I will say on the internet, anytime we post this, people are constantly like, oh, go to my Instagram page to get more. So that's unfortunate because that could be really unsafe as well.
Yeah. So the press, there's no doubt that people in the press use the therapy. And so I think that we have a good way in, but it costs money, really. I have to tell you, when I say that we have to support advocacy groups that trying to get the message out, reporters, I know, they listen and they want to learn. So if you could give them a message that they could research and find to be true, you control the message. And so when we have our lawyers and we have our advocates out making the message, it works. So that's why I enjoy coming to and working with you all, because you're making a message. So reporters will report what you teach them. You just have to teach them. And if you teach them right, they will report it and you could change their mind. So there are people that used to report the news years ago about the stigma. They're not here anymore. They're not reporting it. You have a clean slate, as the senator said, and we could educate the reporters and they could report just as you teach them.
I think it's been interesting. I think it's been interesting to kind of be careful what you wish for, because we want some normalization, right? And let's not have a stigma. But what I've seen in the last few months was like the Wall Street Journal did an article about like executive women using mushrooms to kind of help them be more like productive and on top of their game in their big careers. And like in Silicon Valley, a lot of like the founders of these big startups are using mushrooms to help, you know, unlock creative ideas or whatever. And like that's great, but we're not, I think, trying to push a message that if you know, use psilocybin, it's you know, just to make you better at work, right? That's not like what we're kind of all here for, but it's a very normalized message that kind of helps people not be so fearful of this. So it's kind of like the media is all over the place on this, and that's partly because this psilocybin serves 8 million different purposes for every different type of person. There isn't sort of that one demographic that is representative for this. And so I think the media is going to have to work a little harder than like the lazy sort of Cheech and Chong thing that they did for a long time with cannabis. Like, let's just not do that again. Let's be a little more nuanced about it and understand there isn't just one group using this.
All right, well, we've talked about what this legislation does. We've talked about the importance of patient testimonials. As a grassroots organizer, I will ask each and every one of you to contact your elected officials and support this legislation. House Bill 1, Senate Bill 3695, both are known as the CURE Act. You can call the Capitol switchboard in Springfield if you don't know who your state representative and state senator are. They will put you in touch with who those elected officials are. You just give them your address. The Capitol switchboard, for anybody that's writing it down, 217-782-2000. They will put you in touch with your elected official, participate in democracy, let them know that you support this legislation. We do have lobby days down in Springfield where we work directly with the lawmakers, meeting with them face to face. If you can financially support an organization like the Illinois Psychedelic Society, we'd love to put on more events just like this and inform the public and educate people and activate them to get this legislation passed, because we know that this is beneficial for so many individuals who are resistant to conventional types of treatment. So we're going to wrap up the panel a little bit here. I want each panelist to give kind of a closing statement. And then let's do some Q&A. Let's get the audience involved. Let's see what folks are thinking and feeling about this. I would prefer the Q&A to be questions and not just statements. So let's kind of lean into that a little bit, audience members. But let's start with Dina and work this way on kind of a closing statement. And then anybody with questions, let's line up here, and I will pass the glitter mic to you.
I guess I'll sort of repeat what I just said, which is let's not try to make this overly simple for the media, for the public, for the legislators, for everybody. It's kind of really simple in that this is something that grows in the ground, sure, but in terms of who's using it, why, are you microdosing, are you macrodosing? Like there's just a huge array here of people, uses, forms, all the things, and like take some time, do your homework. Let's play the long game here, is what I would say.
My probable takeaway is going to be remembering that the use happens across the board, right? So if folks might not have access to the formal clinical treatment routes, sharing advice on like safe use practices with one another, ensuring that we're wary of synthetic options that are available to folks, talking about testing, whatever supply folks have access to. I think that's an important message, especially when we're trying to keep folks alive. Carry naloxone if you don't already do. I know it has nothing to do with psilocybin and psychedelics, but it's an important message to plug in.
Yes, it does. Ditto. I would say, get informed. There's lots of resources on the IPS website about the bill. There's talking points and things. So if you're like, I don't know how to talk to my representative, you've got all the info you need. They're not so bad, right? Like, they're not that scary. You can talk to them. We do have some information on psychedelic harm reduction at the Sauna Healing Collective table. So if you want some of that education to share with folks, we've got that too.
So when I would go back to donating to the organization so that the message gets out. That's the most important message that I could leave you with today, because without lobbying, that's the world we live in, without being able to send people to Springfield to stand on the rail and to educate members and to educate leadership about how important this is, we will not pass it. So donate. And if you need the notes for this meeting, this table has it all.
So I've said a lot about the bill. I want to talk just a little bit about my experience in the process of this. So when I brought this bill, well, first I want to thank the representative, because when I first brought the idea to the Senate Dems policy team, they were like, oh, well, what did you think of Rep. Ford's bill? And I was like, what bill? And so they're like, well, go read his bill and come back and tell us what you want to change about it. So when I read through the bill, I was like, oh my God, there's things in here I didn't even think about. So kudos to you. So that was really amazing. And then, we took that and we changed a few things. And then when I took it to the leadership team and I was like, this is the bill I want to do, and they're like, well, let us inform you, freshman senator who knows nothing, that cannabis took a long time and you had to do all these things. So buckle up, it's going to take a while. Just don't get your hopes up. If you can get the committee to consider it, then maybe there's a shot at looking at it. So I was like, okay, I have a task. I'm going to go do that task. And I set all of my intention on just getting the executive committee to agree to hear this bill. And I probably bothered Casina Castro several times. I think she even called you and you were like, yeah, we're working on the bill. But I was like, no, we've got to move this bill. So I get her to agree to doing a subject hearing in it. And then it was like, well, you're going to have to get a number of co-sponsors before, we'll even consider hearing. It's been assigned to the committee, but we're not going to call it until you have a bunch of co-sponsors. So then I went and twisted everyone's arm. I had one-on-one conversations. Jean and so many other advocates came down and had one-on-one conversations at those lobby days. It was great. I mean, it really is the personal stories that was changing people's minds. So then we got a number of, I think at that point we had 15 co-sponsors. So then they agreed to hear it in the committee. And so then it was well, we're not going to call it on the floor until you have at least 30 votes. And so then we had to go, and we finally were able to get 31 solid people saying they were going to vote for this. And then it was well, we can't move it. No, I think at that point it was exactly 30. We can't move the bill until you have bipartisan support. So then we worked with Craig Wilcox, the Republican. He is a veteran, and he really helped us shape some of the increasing the integration and so many other factors. And so when I came back to the Senate president, I was like, okay, I've got it in committee. We've heard it. We've got bipartisan support. We have 30 votes. I'm ready for you to call this bill. And he was astonished at how much progress had taken place. But it's not about what I've done. I think it's a testament to what was already there in place. Whether it's, Jean Lacey and the people up here working with Representative Ford to get the initial draft done, whether it's a testament to the medicine itself or just a testament to where we are in society right now, that from all of the studies from the 50s and the 60s coming back to some of the stuff on Netflix with Michael Pollan and Magic Mushroom or Fantastic Fungi or whatever it's called, all the books that are out there, this is our moment. So it's well, they're still a little blown away, wait a second, cannabis took a long time. We're not ready to call this in the Senate until you can guarantee a 3061. That's when, in earnest, these conversations really started with the governor's office of we need your dedication that you are going to sign this bill if it moves in the House and the Senate. And that's where we're at today. And honestly, while it's been worked on for a long time, it's moving much quicker. And some of it is from the lessons we learned in cannabis. But I'm so hopeful. I feel like we're right there, and we just need everyone's excitement and manifest that this will pass and it will happen. Thank you.
All right. This has been absolutely wonderful from where I'm sitting at the end of the table here. Audience members, are there any questions? Does anybody want to come up here and ask the panel a question? Come on up. Yeah. Not everybody all at once, please.
Yeah, thank you guys. You've all been wonderful. I have a question about the bills you're proposing. Is there any information about what the cost of licensure would be? Are you proposing that?
So her question was, is there anything about the cost? So essentially what it will be put towards is the advisory panel would look at this. And a lot of it has to do with what Oregon and Colorado are doing now. We recognize that those are very high costs. Some of it might look at the marketplace, letting them set it, and whether or not, I don't think there will be the amount of medicine that will be given will not be regulated. So I think some of that will matter. And then whether or not insurance today will cover like the prep session, will cover some of the therapy. So we're kind of looking towards the ketamine assisted therapy type model and trying to build that in. So we have not regulated costs, but we are very aware that some of the costs exist today are too high.
Hello, test. Hi, thank you all for coming. This has been awesome. I work here in Uptown at a research facility testing psychedelic treatment at Uptown Research Institute. So I help with recruitment. I talk to a lot of people who are interested in joining trials for psychedelic treatment, and a lot of people can't qualify. What are some resources for these people who maybe can't get into the treatment now, whether it's educational or, basically resources for people who can't access this stuff currently?
Ketamine-assisted therapy is a lot more accessible. It's available. It's legal. And you don't necessarily run into some of the same contraindications with other medications and other medical conditions that you might, especially in a research setting for something like psilocybin.
Hey there, thank you all for being here. It's been great to hear all the different ideas and perspectives. My question is something that has already kind of been asked, and something that I feel like everyone agrees that we want equitable access for these things. Where in the bill is there assurances that like parties and individuals that have been traditionally left out of these experiences, or having simply the ones who are not privileged enough to have the money to take the flight to Oregon or to even pay for it out of pocket, considering it most likely will not be covered in insurance? Are there any assurances in the bill other than the fact that we are going to have an advisory board that's going to look at that? Like, is there any statements of assurance that there will be money maybe in the revenue that we're going to be creating to go towards individuals that can qualify that would otherwise not have access?
So the answer is no, but I want to be clear about the advisory board. So the reason that there's 18 to 27 members is because we're looking at least one individual from every agency that will be working with this, including some of like the Medicaid looks at it, public health, as well as different doctors, different individuals, like whether it's a psychiatrist, a social worker, people who have utilized the medicine. So it's supposed to be looking at a well-rounded board to really have these discussions. But the majority of the people are some type of medical provider. So the real push is, they know what our insurance world looks like today. And so we really want to make sure that they're trying to get the pricing right. Lawmakers don't get things like that right. I'm just going to be honest, right? Like, it's too big of we have to do these broad strokes. So we do need them to look at the different processes and what it would look like for insurance to cover it. But I will say one other aspect that's not built into the bill, but the Illinois what is it, IPS? Illinois Psychedelic Society, thank you. They have grants and scholarships, I believe, right now to try to help people get care. And I imagine that will be the same going into the future. But at the end of the day, we don't want to have like a GoFundMe to go get, health care. So when I say in earnest, one of the tasks that is built into what the advisory board has to look at is how is this going to be paid for from a like an insurance, Medicaid, Medicare type level, and then advise the state on what has to happen to make that a reality. We're piecemealing it at this point.
And for those for whom that's still not enough, because that's the reality of things. Our little tagline at Sana is "Community is medicine," and there is a decriminalization component to this bill, and people use drugs. Harm reduction is important. Take care of each other, and that's all I'll say about that.
I would think, to add to that, I think we need to make sure that nonprofits are also providing therapy so that philanthropy could donate to nonprofits to provide the therapy. Because, right now we have nonprofit FQACs that provide healthcare. The federally qualified healthcare facilities. So we need to make sure that they're able to get donations to provide it.
First off, thank you so much for all your advocacy and work that you all are doing. We're grateful for that. Is there anything in this bill about the individual practitioner in getting licensed, or does it only have to be at a healing center? I'm asking particularly for those who have done the underground work for years and sort of understand the medicines, but aren't necessarily affiliated with an organization.
So you would have to, if you wanted to be a facilitator who maybe did this like on your own, like independently, you would still have to get 2 licenses. You would have to get a facilitator license and a facility license. And that way they can really make sure that this is being done in a safe setting. You could also get a manufacturer license or a grow license, and you could have all 3. So it's possible for one individual to be providing all of that care in the same place and growing their own product. But we do have to kind of look through this as like, this is a business model. So even individual therapists still have to have a place to do their therapy, and that is still regulated by the state. So this would be no different than that.
And just to kind of add to that, the service centers where the medicine will be administered is the only place that it can take place. It can't be in somebody's home, with the exception of people who aren't able to physically go to the service centers. I think there's a carve out for, but those that are terminally ill or that are physically unable to make it, there's still kind of a carve out for them to be able to have access to this.
So the question kind of just got answered, but just more general for the practicing clinician who believes, this is, going to be a big part of the future, and I want to implement this in my practice. Do you have any advice? How would a practicing clinician prepare for the legalization and implementation of this in a practice?
I think the question was how a practicing clinician would prepare for this. Get training, right? This is a very, very specific kind of work. I think one of the things that a lot of, when I talk to therapists who are curious about this or have started their training, thing that they often say is like there's a lot of unlearning that they have to do about the practice of therapy, because it looks a little bit different, right? It tends to be a lot more non-directive. You might be holding hands with a person, which is not usually something in traditional therapy you might do. So there's a lot of things that you kind of have to unlearn. I think you really want to think about if you are ready and want to and are called to this work, because it is a lot of work. There's actually a really good article. I wrote it down here so I wouldn't forget to tell you, so I'm glad you asked. It's ethical and legal issues in psychedelic harm reduction and integration therapy. So that is an article I co-wrote with some folks. And in that, it goes through all sorts of legal, ethical things you might want to consider in being a psychedelic therapist. But there's also a really nice sort of self-inquiry at the end as the appendix, kind of asking you questions to kind of really think through, is this right for me? Is this something that I actually feel like I could be doing? And then, there's lots of really interesting and solid now training programs out there. I will say that it's a little bit of a wild west when it comes to the training programs, all sorts of costs and things as well. And there's really no framework for what is going to be accepted as an official training program yet. We have some examples from Oregon, which are helpful. And there are some organizations that are trying to come up with standards and maybe even a certification exam for psychedelic therapists. So there are some things in the works that will hopefully help, narrow the focus and make this a little bit more streamlined for folks.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. And when I talk about advisory board, I think we're thinking, it's an advisory board is going to tell us this, that. That is the driving force. So we're legislating that this group of experts are going to come together and they're going to they're going to basically tell IDFPR, this is what the training needs to look like, this is what the testing needs to look like. So that advisory board is more than just like advisors. They are the experts, and that's why it's really important that like who we're putting on there and how we're defining who goes on that board really makes a difference. So people with lived experience, people who have worked with this medicine before, it's going to be crucial that their voices are leading this. And this is why I said it's not good for lawmakers to say that, because I don't know anything about that really. You know what I mean? Like we are just saying that the state has the ability to go do this, and we need to hire the experts to make sure we get it right. And so that's kind of where the law is a framework of it, but then it's going to continue to be this evolving organic board that is setting what that testing looks like, what those, like you said, whether you're holding hands, what's ethically right, what's morally right, not brainwashing someone when they're under this medicine. Like, we want the experts to say that, not lawmakers.
And actually, that just reminded me, there is some language in the bill that outlines some of the sort of like basics of what the education programs should entail. So there are things like ethics, some things about, you know, knowing what like psychological diagnoses are, you know, like knowing how to assess for certain things. So there is some stuff that's already outlined in the language of the bill. So get yourself reading those 300 pages. And I can't tell you exactly what page it's in right now, but if you ask me later, I might be able to find it for you.
All right, this will be the last question for the panelists.
From what I understand, there's some pretty significant issues in the cannabis community regarding equity as far as who gets to open a dispensary and where they're located. Is there language in either of the bills regarding equity considerations regarding who gets to become a licensed facility or where those facilities might be allowed to be located?
No, but like I said, we are talking about some negotiations. So right now, it's basically like anyone can apply. The facilitator has some requirements, which I had laid out, but the facility themselves, not so much. However, if we end up doing more like a pilot program where we're limiting the number of licenses, then yes, that is going to have to be something that is built in. But initially, we had it, the way the bill is written today is it's open to anybody to go through these training programs or licensing programs. Obviously, there is a cost to that. I think Oregon's is something like $10,000 a year for a license for a healing center. So that's, you know, a barrier to getting involved. But they've also made a lot of money on the back end. So we did not build any like loan access or investment dollars. But I would say, going back to what you talked about, the community, like there's a really good opportunity. We're laying that opportunity. We're hoping people will work together to go after it. But if we do end up limiting down to a number of licenses, it will be a consideration at that point.
I can't remember what there are some specific numbers as far as certain number of people that can have however many like facilities, so there's not like a monopoly, so there's some of those protections in there. There's like 1,000 feet from a school kinds of stuff in there. Yeah. But
all right, we got one more question coming up here.
So we know obviously that marijuana has been legalized, but many employers still will disqualify you for testing positive for marijuana. How are we going to handle that with psilocybin?
well, psilocybin isn't one of the drugs that usually comes up on a standard drug test panel, is it? Do you know? So there's that. Yeah.
Yeah, the drug testing industry has made its industry off of cannabis, for the most part. So I'm not that worried about it. So we've had the audience ask some questions. Now the role is going to be reversed. I have a question for the audience. This is the honor system. You don't need to participate if you don't want to. But who here has contacted their state representative or their state senator about this legislation? Just a show of hands. All right, so we got some more work to do. And that's why these events are really wonderful and beneficial. Panelists, thank you so much for this conversation. It has been enjoyable, it has been informative, and it has been an absolute pleasure of mine. So please, everybody, give a warm hand up for the audience. All right, and this is a mixer, so now we can go back to mixing it up, talk amongst yourselves, tip your bartenders, get some of the wonderful food here, and enjoy this venue.